start. Once again, a very warm welcome from our side to our session, Safe Routes to School, a Dutch Way. I'm Shelley Bontje, working at Mobycon as a mobility advisor, working on engagement projects. And I'm luckily not all by myself.
I'm Ryan Jacobsen. I'm an urban designer and urban planner with Mobycon.
Thank you. We will start our presentation. I hope you can all see this. As we said, we are from Mobycon. We are a Dutch-based consultancy, and we are very happy to share the knowledge which we gained throughout the work we have been doing last years. But at the same time, we're also very happy to get to know you a little bit more. So as you might have seen in the comments, we have prepared a Miro board. I will also share it here. What you can do, and I really would like to advise you to do, really kindly ask you to do so, because we would love to make this workshop a little bit more interactive than that you only have to sit back and listen and just that's it. So what we would like to do to get some idea who is joining us, to join the Miro, and it's great that I already see loads of you, so that's going great. If you have questions about this, please feel free to ask it in the chats or ask to unmute yourself and we will give you the floor. On the left hand side, you can find a sticky notes button, and we would love to see and to get to know you by answering the first question: which mode did you use to travel to your primary school? And I will add mine as well. And we are just doing that to get some idea, because we will focusing on safe routes to school, to have some idea what people their own experience is. So please reflect and think about how it was to go to primary school, might be some years ago, or if you're a parent, perhaps you can think about the situation of your children. And if there are any questions about this, how the Miro works, please feel free to reach out. I'm checking the Q&A section. I don't see any questions. I see people putting their answers in. Might it be nice to have this walk and cycle? That sounds like a very active way. I see a lot of walking, so I think that's nice. I also see going by car, which I was expecting. And then, yes, we can change to the next question. How did you experience this way of traveling to your primary school? Yes, please feel free to add anything. Please feel free to share what you think is interesting to share. For us, it's very nice to see, because we can see your faces at the moment. So this gives some idea about what kind of group we are.
And it would also be great if you used a different color in the question on the left, if you use the same color for the question on the right. So we know how that translates.
If you want to change colors, you can do that easily here. How did you experience your travels to primary school? It was normal. I think for me, it was also something as a child, just normal, and accepted the way it was. Oh, someone lived very nearby school. I see liberating and socially enjoyable. I think that's really nice to see. I feel like people are still adding their post-its, so I will give it some time. If you just joined the session because we started around 3 and we understand that you join in a little bit later, we shared a Miro link in the comments where we will ask you to to be a little bit interactive with us. So please use the link and see if you're able to add answers to the questions via the sticky notes tool on the left-hand side. And if there are any questions about Miro, let us know, because we're happy to help. And of course, you can continue adding your information here. I just make some bigger. Okay, I see a lot of walking. I see some cycling, cars, buses. We can definitely use that in our presentation. Yes, we are indeed in the Netherlands at the moment, and not in the UK, unfortunately. We were going to last year be in Oxford, but as we all know, that didn't go through, and now we have this online event, so it's nice to make this happen. Okay, you can continue adding your postage here. We will continue our presentation. We have a PowerPoint presentation which we will present. We will give some Dutch backgrounds. We will talk you through the school scan we have developed, and if we have time, we will do a case study. But just to start and to introduce ourselves a bit more, we would like to show you how we traveled to our primary school. As you already shared some information with us, we thought it would be nice to just share some information from our side as well. So I grew up in the Netherlands, very nearby The Hague. And I think I didn't realize by then, but I was quite spoiled with the way I was able to travel to school. So some pictures here from my side. It was literally walking out of the garden of my parents. There was a playground besides my parents' house. It's very green. There is a little water pond. And then this building in the middle picture is the school I was attending. And actually, for the route going there, I walked. It was a 3-minute walk, 250 meters, like very nearby. And I didn't have to cross any motorized streets. I only had to cross a bi-directional bicycle path. So yeah, I think the way how this neighborhood is planned is very, very friendly to children going to school. And the whole urban planning around this primary school is focused on having residential areas in a circle around this primary school. So yeah, this was my route in the Netherlands, and curious how your route was.
Yeah, so as you can probably tell from my accent, I am not Dutch. I did grow up in the suburbs of Chicago. And as you can see, my route, well, this is only the beginning of my route, but it very much was far, far less convenient than Shelley's route. I walked to the bus stop up my street, which was a very slow speed, typical residential cul-de-sac in the US, often with my mom or one of my younger brothers. And when I mapped this in Google, it said that's a 1-minute walk. Well, Google Maps, I don't think is very accurate for children, because I know for a fact that it did not take us a minute. I think 5 minutes is a very aggressive estimate, but kids walk at much slower speeds. They create a very imaginative route along the way. I have a picture here on the upper right. This is what we called the island. And there were a lot of inventive conversations about the island that we had. So this is only the beginning of my route. It then moves to the bus stop. So the residential through street is where the bus would pick us up. There were bus stops all along this very circuitous route that you see on the left side of the screen here. It was about an 8-kilometer route, or I think that's about 5 miles. And I believe that the trip was about 30 minutes along the way. So, you know, children would come from different cul-de-sacs. They would go to their very informal bus stop, which was on this residential through street, and fill up this big yellow school bus that you see on the upper right-hand corner here. That would pull up right in front of the school, and we would get off and go directly in the school. Now, it was a little different after school. You see on the image on the lower right, a pickup area, and this is where buses would be waiting. I think the first day they numbered these buses, but the bus parks in the same spot every day. So after school, it's just like the first day of school is a little difficult, but then, you know that you have to go to that same bus every time in order to go home.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And did you enjoy it being on the bus?
Yeah, it was a very social experience, I guess.
Yeah.
You know, you meet a lot of kids that way.
Yeah.
But I would have loved to have a 3-minute walk to school.
Yeah. To add to my roots, that's the neighborhood my parents lived and currently live. It's developed in the 1960s and started developing 1960s, completed in 1980. So it was definitely a post-Second World War development. But I would say that besides the neighborhoods, the cycle and pedestrian network is quite dense as well. But I wouldn't. It's a very, not all primary schools, of course, in the Netherlands are designed like this. And as it's very nice to talk about like looking back and think about the experience we had as a child. Of course, we're now professionals in the field like you are. And we were curious, like if you think about the route you were taking, were there any measures the city, the municipality took to improve your routes? Or if you look back, like was there any advice you would give to the routes or the current route of your children? And we saw a divide between perhaps things that the city or your municipality did and what the schools are doing. Thanks again for adding so many post-its. I'm happy to see that you're able to find how this works. Thanks to all the digital techniques we have nowadays. And there's a question for you,
Yeah,
Ryan.
I do see the question about how old was I when I started getting on the bus. I believe I was age 5 or 6. In the US, it was whatever equates to first grade, which I think is 5 or 6, if I remember correctly. But I rode the bus all the way until I was about 16 in high school. And then like a dirty teenager, I drove to school. Yeah.
But it's also
so it's the unfortunate circumstance when you're living kind of in an isolated suburban context.
Yeah. But
things have changed since then.
Yeah. Okay. So there were measures taken by either the town.
Oh, I meant with my own mentality.
Okay. Okay.
I haven't owned a car in 15 years.
Yeah. It's almost disappointing to see that most of the post-its are saying that there weren't any measures taken. I think it's really showing the real world we are living in, but it would have been kind of nice to be a little bit more optimistic about it. But we, of course, now working in the field are the ones that will be able to change that. And we hope that with this workshop, you will get new inspiration and ideas to do so. Thanks again for contributing to the Miro. I will switch back to the presentation unless you see one of the posts which you want to highlight.
There are a few interesting ones on the right-hand side here about lollipops, which I don't know what a lollipop person is.
I think it's a person with standing with a traffic signboard and walks in and then navigates the traffic. Okay, as I said, we will go back to the presentation, and so I really hope that this session helps you to work on improving school routes, school zones, and I really would like to start with a brief Dutch context, because we are aware that every situation is different. And I really want to say that in the Netherlands, it hasn't been perfect always, and still it isn't. But just to give you some historical background, and I hope this also helps you to see that you can make changes, because in the Netherlands, loads of changes have been made. And for example, I already recalled it earlier, after the Second World War, there was a big increase of welfare in the Netherlands, and at the same time, a big increase of car ownership and car use. And we call it kind of the tipping point, because after some years, with this high use of cars and the small historical streets we have in the Netherlands, something changed. And the main thing was that parents were protesting. and why parents protested, because unfortunately quite some accidents happens with children. And we all know in the field that if you're a motorized vehicle and you speed, the impact you have on someone that is vulnerable is way bigger than if you walk into each other, if you bike and cycle, or you bike and walk and then coming across each other. The car has just a way bigger impact. So there were quite some accidents. There were some very active community groups saying that something should change. And then what happened, that the Dutch government started heavily invested to accommodate cyclists and pedestrians. And they refer to that we need to protect vulnerable people in our streets. So we don't see a cyclist or a motorist or pedestrian at the same level. We say that some people are more vulnerable than those in motorist traffic, and we need to protect them. And how we're going to do that? We're going to do that with a policy which was called Duurzaam Veilig. So translated to sustainable safety. So how can we make sure that vulnerable people are safe in our streets? And these experts are still very present here in the Netherlands. And they also gave us inspiration to develop our school scan. So this will come back later on. As less, I would like to share before we go to the school scan that at the moment, 75% of school children cycle towards school. So it's really in the Netherlands, so it's really a high percentage. And most of the children cycle together with their parents. And we really see a big role of parents here because children learn from their parents from very young ages. But on the downside, we also see that more and more people, especially before the pandemic, things have slightly changed now because people can work a little bit flexible from home. But we see that with an increase of both the parents starting to work, there was an increase of using the car to travel to primary school, dropping off children, and then continue to work. So also here in the Netherlands, there's work to be done to encounter that. This was the brief introduction of the Dutch context. There's way more to talk about, but we will focus in on the school zones. There's loads of information available about the Dutch historical developments that happened. If you have any question about that, please feel free to reach out later on because I'm eager to talk about it. But for now, I will change to the main topic of today's session. And that is a scan which we developed to analyze how can you make child-friendly school zones. And again, it's really focused on accommodating vulnerable people. So children that learning to cycle, we call them vulnerable. We need to help them and protect them. And we made 3 categories. And the first one is engineering, the second one is education, and the third one is engagement. Why we've chosen these categories is that the engineering one really focuses on the physical environment. Education is really making children feel confident and being able to participate in traffic safely. And engagement, because you need to engage the parents, teachers, and other stakeholders. To go a bit deeper on this, we operationalized these 3 teams and we indicated 10 different elements. We will describe them briefly. So we will discuss these 10 elements now. And we feel like if you look at any school zone and you go through all these elements and you see what the current situation is and what you can improve, you can contribute to making child-friendly school zones. I've been talking a lot and now I'm happy to invite Ryan to start talking about the engineering category.
Yeah. So we do view this a little bit broader in kind of thinking about the full context of the physical environment. So when we say dedicated network, and this is really one of the bedrock elements of safe school zones, it's lying in the connectivity of this school to its surrounding network of destinations and streets and open spaces. So one of the first steps in our process is really to analyze the kind of how the school fits within the urban fabric. So what are its adjacent and neighboring land uses? How is it connected to public transport? And what are the hierarchy of streets within that network? And a useful step early in the process, we feel, is to categorize the different street types. This helps us define what each of these street types, what their role is within the network. And we find that particularly to be helpful because when you define a role, you can really start to talk about the place value of streets that surround a school. You can talk about that place value with stakeholders. And what we mean by place value is that a street for staying, or is that a street for going, or does it fit somewhere in the middle? So we've developed these evaluation metrics, and you see kind of scan of these on the right-hand side here. We use this grid when we engage with stakeholders, whether it's parents or school staff. We engage children in a very different way. But this is a very good template for going out and really analyzing a street. And when you've assigned a place value, then you can set goals for that street.
And the place value for school zones is very important.
Yes, extremely important. Yes. So a network of safe, a dedicated network with safe cycling, safe walking routes is really the key to establishing active transportation for schools. I don't think that that's anything earth-shattering for the crowd that we have in the session today. But we think of when we think of these routes, some things that kind of come to mind are sidewalks wide enough for groups to walk? Are they wide enough for people to walk a child to walk side by side with their parents? There's this term walking buses.
Oh yeah.
That we use, and I feel like that's an interesting term. It's also very important to have clear lines of vision from a safety perspective. It's important for cycle lanes to be wide enough where a child can cycle side by side with their parents. So when we say dedicated network, these are the kinds of things that we're thinking about, and making sure that there are areas to stop, sit, relax, and play, which are along that walking route. And sometimes there are opportunities when you do the place value evaluation and really analyze that network. There are opportunities when the place value is so high to close down a street. This is an example in The Hague of a pedestrian-only play street that wasn't contributing much to the street network, and therefore in discussions with stakeholders, there was the opportunity to close that street and create this play area. I was not there during the greatest weather day, so you don't see tons of kids playing in this space, but believe me, it's very occupied when the weather is nice. And so with an established and a dedicated network in place, traffic calming becomes another element that we find to be extremely important. Traffic calming measures will make that route feel safer and more comfortable, specifically to those users. And it is said, and I think the most recent person who I heard say this was Jeanette Sadik Khan, who is the past commissioner of DOT in New York City. If a street is safe for children, then a street is safe for everyone. Now, if a street is designed to be safe for children, then it's safe for everyone. And traffic calming plays a huge role in that. So you can go to the next slide.
Somewhere.
So in the context of the Netherlands, we see traffic calming measures play out, especially from my perception, in a different circumstance than I've noticed in working in New York for 7 years. One of the things that I find particularly interesting is the Dutch have this way of taking multiple traffic calming measures, and they all work in unison. Whereas in many other contexts, you kind of focus on just singular traffic measures. But there's a very holistic approach, and it's very user-based. So that's why I've placed these 2 images on the right. When you're designing these spaces, you really have to think about the perspective of the city at eye level for kids. They're at a very different perspective. The texture of planting, the height of planting, the presence of street trees, these are all very important things to really engage the senses of young children, and making sure that crossings are at surface. So there's a lot to say about this topic, but I will say that the Dutch do an extraordinary job at making sure that there's multiple traffic calming measures in place. In particular, in front of schools, we find that that's where traffic calming measures should really be intensified. And so where there is that opportunity, and you see a couple of images here, one from Copenhagen on the left, the other from Paris, an open street pilot. There's an opportunity to kind of intensify these near schools so that entry point is much safer and accessible for children. And also when you create places, when the place value increases and you create places, include benches, include areas to play, when you create places, people, they come and use those spaces, and that creates another layer of traffic calming. The street is no longer, only for that van that you see passing, but that van needs to now proceed even with more caution because there are people occupying that space. Related to that are recognizable features, which is another key element of the 10. This is the third of the 10. Recognizable features within school zones are a way to kind of mark that there's a school within the vicinity. And they can provide a signal for drivers to be extra careful. We know that the actions of children are not always predictable. So it's almost an added layer of protection when you have these recognizable features that you should slow down because there is a school within this vicinity. And so this image and then the one on the next page, you can see that there's also the opportunity that we've seen some municipalities in the Netherlands take to really create vibrant spaces with these recognizable features. So it adds vibrancy, color, and a little bit of playfulness to the street experience. And to me, I found that very, very refreshing. Also, it kind of similar to where you intensify these. I feel like there are opportunities, and you see it on the image on the right here, to really intensify these near busy intersections. And that's just another way to announce for cars to slow down. And of course, as Shelley mentioned, she didn't have to cross any intersections. I didn't have to cross any intersections because I was in a bus for most of my route. But we know that if your journey is longer than 3 minutes, you are likely going to have to cross an intersection. And that is one of the most challenging barriers to creating a safe route. And so we have research that shows Dutch neighborhoods with safe intersections lead children to walk or cycle to school 3 to 5 times more often than compared to other neighborhoods. That's not shocking research. It's very evident. But the Dutch also do a great job at really protecting children at intersections. And this is done through reducing crossing distances, lane widths, simplifying the geometry at intersections, making sure that crosswalks are at grade, so it's most convenient for those who are walking or cycling. And then when signalized intersections are present, another feature could be adding leading pedestrian or leading bike intervals.
Thanks, Ryan. Oh, we have another element.
And then the last element that we have that's kind of related to the more physical environment is to accommodate parking. And in the Dutch context, that's a little different than what I hear accommodate parking. It's very much focused on bicycle parking, which Shelley has tons of experience on. However, when working within a school zone, we think of parking in a slightly more dynamic way, I would say, as it's especially important to consider the process of drop-off and pickup. So when I'm working on a school zone project, I really think of whether there are multiple entrances to that school. Are there often queues that happen when kids are entering school? Does additional space need to be allocated for that? And we call that pedestrian parking. Are there opportunities, if there are parking lots on the school, to space those as far as possible, or avoid conflicts with walking routes or cycling routes? And so that's what we mean when we say accommodate parking.
Thanks a lot, Ryan. I think for me, the engineering part is always interesting, although I'm not a designer or engineering myself, but you actually didn't really like the category engineering, or did you? Because you didn't share it now. You're if you want to share it, you can say.
Yeah, well, I tend to look at the physical context in a very holistic way, because my training is in urban design.
So. Yeah. So it's more designing than really engineering.
Yeah.
Just for the flow of the presentation, I will continue with the categories education and engagement. And I've seen your questions, so we'll get back to that. Thanks a lot, and feel free to add more. The next category, which we feel is very important for growing the confidence of vulnerable road users, is traffic education. In the Netherlands, we see a distinction between informal education and formal education. And the informal one is the one I've already pointed out. That's the role parents play with learning their children how to act in traffic and how to move around. Hereby, you often don't really know that you are learning or educate your children how to behave in traffic. So it's not really a set of a format that parents need to follow or so. It's just something that really happens, and I think here parents just have are a role model for their children. And really be aware that in the Netherlands, because cycling is, I guess, more common than in other parts of the world, there's a big chunk of learning from the age of 0 to the age of 5. So when they start entering school, children already sometimes are a little bit more educated about cycling than if you're totally not used to it. So often if we do educational projects in the Netherlands or outside the Netherlands, we have a different approach, because if you start from 0, then the formal education is more important. to share what we feel is formal education. In the Netherlands, schools, primary schools don't have to, so it's not one of the things schools need to teach, so it's still optional. But there's the option to educate children in traffic safety, and luckily loads of schools are doing that. And one of the ways they do that is by providing a traffic safety exam, and you see that on the picture, the girl with the orange vest. So she's taking a practical exam, and that's done in the end of the primary school. So then it helps children to go to secondary school by bike themselves. So that's why there's a threshold on that age at primary school. I think the traffic exam is great and it works well, and I think it's very important, and can talk a lot about that more. But I really want to emphasize that if children don't have any informal education before joining school, you just really don't start with immediately an exam, because that really frightens people off. It's important that people or children or people that are not able to cycle learn in a very playful way, and not start with the exam immediately. I think in the Netherlands it is possible to do that because children already have some more experience. And that's why the other picture, there are so many ways to learn traffic education in a playful way. I'm sure there might be people in the session that have experience with that as well. And otherwise, there's much what you can do to make people learn in a playful way. But education to make people feel self-confident is very important. But then, of course, it's not only about the people that are vulnerable themselves and need to behave, but it's also about the people around them. And for school zones, we know that they are very complex areas. So we often do a stakeholder analyze or a stakeholder mapping exercise. So we bring in a map and see what kind of stakeholders need to be involved if you are starting working in that area. And often there are like multiple stakeholders, from residents living there, people working there, little shops, like loads of different factors. And my personal experience is if you involve them as much as possible, you get a better outcome if you don't, because sometimes also people feel like they are not part of the changes which are going to take, or developments which are going to be taken. And then people feel they are not part of the conversation, and that is often not a good thing to have. Another thing, what we really do within those 10 elements within our scan is data collection, so that you know what the situation is. And I can keep it kind of brief here, but it's quite important. In every place it's different what the distances are between the primary school or secondary school and the places where people live, because we're not going to expect that people are going to cycle 15K when they are very young, so it's also very important to map your data and see how much potential there is for people to start working, or how much potential there is to start cycling, or how much potential there is for public transport. So to map it, you can find different ways than only going by private car. Another element is, if you have done the stakeholder mapping exercise, if you have done your data collection, which kind of tools are you going to use to engage everyone, to change behavior if that's needed. And you already mentioned the walking bus. That's one of the tools, which is great if you know that in a certain area of a neighborhood there are living X number of people that could potentially walk, so that you can make a nice campaign out of that and use that tool. But if, for example, the distances are too far to walk, then the walking bus doesn't make sense. One of the nice tools, I think, which is also quite common in the UK, is the school street. So there are multiple things where you can think of, and there's no one size fits all solution for school zones, unfortunately, because that would have made it easier, but that isn't the case. And as last element, we have the effective engagement. I think I already briefly touched on that during my stakeholder mapping assignment. So yeah, I really believe you can make loads of things happen if you engage the right people, if you engage parents in this walking bus, if you engage people in the surroundings with implementing a school street. So that are all the elements which for us fits into engagement. Here again, we will have the overview of all the 10 elements. It's not a test, so it's fine if you don't remember them all. But these elements we all take in consideration when we do our work, and we are happy to discuss this further. But I also want to attach on a question which is asked. I think we have time for that, and then we will go to our case study. Yep. First question from Rob. Hi, Rob. Thanks for your question. I think personally, the first thing I noticed, I will read your question out loud if that's probably best. You recall like the Netherlands was not always so cycling friendly. How long did this transition take to change? And was there needed to be a major change in attitudes amongst Dutch people towards cyclists? And mainly for me, the word cyclist is a very non-Dutch way to phrase this question. Because in the Netherlands, I think everyone is almost as much a cyclist, as much as a car driver, as much, not public transport, a bit less, but car ownership in the Netherlands is really, really high. Okay, Ryan does have a car, but maybe we're too much into this topic that we're not an average Dutch presenting here. But so we don't see people as cyclists. Most of the time people do have a bike, do have a car, and they cycle. And I think there's already a big change. So yes, I think that is something that definitely should change in the UK. Recalling the Dutch situation, yes, change needs a lot of time. As I shared, it was after the Second World War. I think the Sustainable Safety Program started in 1997, if I recall it correctly. So it took quite some years before the government started to act. And then I think that is very, very much important, because as we build our physical environment, we also shape people, their behavior. If it becomes so accessible and so safe to cycle, like it's kind of they build it and they will come. I'm not sure who said that, but it's also one of the phrases I really, really believe in. So that really helps to change the attitude. And then I come back to my earlier point. Once people are almost all cyclists, it's not really car drivers against cyclists. It's the environment is so inviting. I know this is kind of the dream ideal world I'm talking about, but I'm sure that this is possible to change in other places as well. It takes time, but really strive for that dream world. Make environments that are open for everyone, and people will start using it. And I think what sometimes is something to be aware of in the UK. I'm not so much aware of the US, but that sports cyclists is very different than just the Dutch way of cycling, using your bike everywhere. And I think it's really important to bridge those two different groups. That was my answer. I'm not sure if you have something to add.
No, I think that's good, and we want to save a little bit of time.
Yes.
Study.
I will try to answer the next question shortly. The question was who funds these measures taken that Ryan was talking about. A lot comes from the government. So we are aware that funds at governmental institutions are sometimes an issue, as Ryan and I also discussed the Dutch and US context. But yes, loads of funding comes from the government. Being aware that loads of schools in the Netherlands are also public schools, so we don't have a lot of private schools. I think the situation could be different if you have more private funds available. The Netherlands is quite still on these kind of stuff, quite heavily dependent on the government.
And I would just add that in the US context, sometimes it is a partnership between a foundation and the government that funds. And this is mainly for temporary or private pilot projects.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks for adding that. And I see another question, and then we will go to the case study. And I think we can make that work. Question is about rural versus urban areas. Yes, big portion of the Netherlands is quite urban. We are currently also more in the urban area. But of course, distances become longer on more rural settings. Definitely for secondary schools, the using the bike to school is very, very high as well, but the numbers are a bit lower than on urban settings, which I think also relates to if you collect your data, you see where people live and where they have to travel to. We're not expecting children to travel big chunks of routes. But maybe something to add on this is that for secondary schools, people give their children sometimes an e-bike. I know we have a huge bicycle market here, so there's also becoming more and more secondhand e-bikes onto the market. So sometimes you see that children having to do the longer distances do it even with an e-bike. Yeah. Okay, I think we've shared our 10 elements. To activate you a little bit more, we will go back to the Miro, and we have a case study for you. And what we were planning to do with this case study is to invite you guys to think about this school and think about the 10 elements we presented and see if you can give any advice for us on this case study. We, of course, briefly introduce this school. The school is based in the city of Utrecht. It's a quite urban area, so it's not a rural area. And we actually analyzed the school for projects we've done. So it's a real case study. And we are curious what your feedback will be. Ryan, will you be able to briefly introduce the map which we are seeing now?
Yeah, sure. So we've given a level of basic information. We realized that to do a full analysis, you would need more information than this. But this map on the left just gives you a kind of general idea of how the school is located within the urban fabric. To the north and the south, there are a few streets which have, I would consider, kind of local destination confluence of retail. So we've highlighted those in blue and orange. The thicker line signifies two-way traffic, which as these streets are generally a little bit higher volume than the one-way streets that you see in the very thin blue line that have quite low traffic volumes. There is a bus stop on the street 2 blocks to the west of our school. The school that we're looking at, by the way, is kind of right in the center of the map. But on that same street, you've got another school just in the backdrop. I believe, is that a private school?
No.
It's a secondary school?
Yeah. No, also primary.
Okay,
Yeah.
also a primary school. And within this entire vicinity, like much of the kind of urban areas in the Netherlands, there's a very complete cycling network, including a cycling street just 1 block over from the school. So just consider this entire area is quite suitable for cycling. And there is a pedestrian street, as you see on the just to the west of the school. We have a few photos here that kind of show how the east-west and the north-south street look in the context of where the school sits. Image 1 looks towards the east over the raised intersection, and the school is just in the upper left-hand corner there. You see the bike parking just to the left. Image 2 is a little bit further down that street, and it really highlights that there are residential buildings on both sides of that street and a lot of on-street parking. It is a two-way street. It looks very narrow, but that is a two-way street. But it's a slow speed street. I believe it's 15 kilometers an hour.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then image 3 and 4, image 3, the school is in the upper right. This is again looking north across that raised intersection. And in image 4, we're looking in the opposite direction towards the south. You see the school, the main entrance to the school, fronting Nolenstraat.
Mm-hmm.
And the bike parking again on the left, and notice that there are residential buildings on the right, but this is a one-way street with just parking on one side.
Yeah, and what we want to ask you, but we know we don't have that much time perhaps left, but thinking of the elements we shared with you, and I want to add, besides the physical aspects, the school is really into education. So they have a mobility week once a year where whole participating in mobility, safe participating is central. They do the traffic safety exam, but they have one problem, and that is that they think that the parents are not behaving how they would like to see. So they are kind of asocial parents dropping off their children and continuing the route by car. I think more people have ever encountered this situation around schools. So what we would like to ask you again is to use a post-it. And if you have any advice for this case study, what would you do, or which element would you feel like this is the element to use to solve the problem? That is actually the case study which we prepared. So if there are people which have ideas at the moment, please feel free to add them here.
Mm-hmm. And also feel free to unmute, and if you have questions that you'd like to voice or perspectives, we'd love to hear that as well.
Yeah, definitely, because we haven't seen you yet, so it would be nice if there are some thoughts or ideas to share. Of course, we are also open to ask any other questions. And I see some of the comments, some very interesting links are shared. I think it's always nice to transfer knowledge from different countries and within the Europe and with the UK. And yeah, we really hope we inspired you with this session and that you got some ideas about, okay, where do I need to think about when I look into school zones? We really want to thank you for at least joining this session, because there were so many things on the program which were all very exciting. And so we feel, very nice that you joined our session. And in the meantime, we see that there are coming post-its, so that's nice. Ooh, I see one about make traffic free outside school entrance. And I think that one is very interesting. There are other ones coming up. I see also a question about if park and stride is popular in the Netherlands to remove traffic away from the schools. It isn't such a big thing in the Netherlands yet, but to be honest, and I don't want to interrupt too much with the advice you're giving us at the moment, but we did feel like, and as some of you are also sharing, that although this street is all very, very much traffic calmed, you see the recognizable features, there can definitely be still things to be improved. But what would happen if you close the streets as a school street on a temporary basis? And that's the advice that we are given. So then you also need to think about where do people need to park. And I also saw already a comment about, okay, you really need to think about how you design those drop-off zones for your children. And I think it's definitely really nice if parents also join their children into the school and not just drive off. So I really enjoyed the park and stride concept, but it's not that common yet in the Netherlands. For this school, we advised to implement a school street setting, and they started pioneering with that. So we are very curious to see how that goes. But I think a big thing around school streets or park and stride, you really need to accommodate parking as well. So yeah, you want to add something here? Or?
I know I just saw that there's an interesting question on the bottom related to parental choice in the Netherlands. And if children have, or if parents have the choice of where their kids go to school.
Yeah.
So.
Oh yes, there is the freedom of choice. Yeah. And that is also very important with your data collection, because you will see in different places, mainly outside the Netherlands, that makes a big impact. Mm-hmm. But in the Netherlands, there is the freedom of choice. So most of the people will find a school very nearby, which is ideal if you want to work on active modes of transport. But what sometimes happens in certain neighborhoods, people don't want to have their children's schools in that neighborhood, and they go to other areas. So I know in some parts of Amsterdam, for example, there are restrictions because, we kind of knows how it goes if there are parents that they feel that your children get better schooling in another area. I think it's almost the end of our presentation. I really want to share this slide in case there's something you want to continue the conversation with us about. So please feel free to reach out to us via mail or connect with us on LinkedIn. And we really hoped you got some inspiration, that you could follow us with the three categories we've made and the elements. And if there are any questions left, please feel free to ask them. I actually have some questions to Ryan, which I might ask later on. But I'm also aware that the plenary session will start in a couple of minutes. So it's totally fine if you leave this session and continue somewhere else. But I might want to ask a question to Ryan, if that's okay.
Yes.
Okay, so Ryan, I know you're not a parent yet. I'm not sure if you have any plans to do so. That doesn't matter. But how do you deal with the situation that parents might be extra risk averse with their own children, so that you as a planner, how do you deal with these kind of situations? Because I think we can all imagine that if you are a parent, you're very careful, and so sometimes people might choose to go by car because they feel it's more safe. How do we deal with these kind of situations?
Well, I think I would have to be, this is very common, I think, in our line of work. I think we have to be very sensitive to parents, that they want the best for their child. They want to make sure that their child is safe. And I think from our perspective, we need to understand that this is a process. When designing and planning for school zones, it's a long process, and there is increasing research that continues to identify how important it is to have school zones and clean air, and how decarbonization will have a very large impact on the future population.
Also on your children.
So there's a lot of research that's building, which we need to use to just educate. And that's the first level in this process. And then eventually, when we do have the opportunity to do a pilot project, or work with the city on a street redesign, that's where we can kind of bring in our design strength. And so I don't know if that fully answers the question, but I think it's important to just say that this is part of a process, and you can't go from capturing zero of those elements to getting all 10. It's a long-term process.
Making smaller steps, but having a vision and go for something. No, I can totally follow that. And I also see here that children have bikes, but parents might be the ones that's keeping them from using it. And I think it's also so much important that children are out, active, and play. And somehow we need to really make that present and aware within school areas more than preferring the short-term safety of your child above all the long-term positive benefits. Yeah. So it's nice to work on this topic. Yeah. Okay. I think it's time to close the session. Yeah.
I think
Thanks again, everyone, for attending, and we'll see or talk to you later.
Yes, maybe next time in person.
Yes, that would be nice. That would be very much exciting.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks a lot, and